咧，如果我哋唔用場地嗰支咪，你話 echo 太大嘅話咧，我驚陣間因為個 speaker 可能講咁耐，我驚可能會細聲咗。我試一試，如果我細聲啲，睇我講你收聲唔清楚。如果我用依家呢個聲量，你哋個咪會唔會收得清楚？用依家呢個聲量個咪收得清唔清楚？有冇邊一邊支咪或者係收？係咯，因為我如果依家呢度立場嗰支收唔收到啊？用呢個聲量，立場嗰支咪會唔會好細聲？依家咁樣聽？立場係喺邊個位？我咁嘅聲你收得係咪聽唔到啊？如果咁嘅聲太細聲係咪啊？如果支咪係咪如果校一校個 echo 可能會 OK 啊？你試下校細聲，你試下細聲啲，校細聲。我用 OK 嘅我覺得。唔該，可唔可以校一校支咪試下閂細聲啲，因為可能聽唔到。我係坐呢度。你裝一裝嗰，我幫你裝一裝。
頭花。
問嚟嘅，但係同呢個差唔多。上面講嘅就冇一篇文，佢意思係話一個方面上要重複好多次，咁啲人就會想睇。係啦。試下想去 testing， 好 testing， 好。
我冇啲啊。
1、2、3 ABC，testing。
再嚟啊。
testing， 1、2、3 testing。
嗰啲係咪？有冇試一試支咪
？testing， 好 OK， 好。
咁啲嘅事 testing。
試埋呢啲。
testing， 應該冇問題。testing ABC 醫生，好多謝各位記者今日出席第33次民間記者會。今日嘅主題係舊例借屍污蔑抗爭，魔警潛權律政放空。咁我哋會有3個環節，分別係中英文發言人同埋問答環節。我哋再一次多謝基進報道提供手語傳譯員。Thank you very much for attending the first Citizen Press Conference today. A very warm welcome from us here. our theme today is Under the Color of Law, on the invocation of the Anti-Terrorism Ordinance Against Peace. The conference will have divided into two parts. We'll begin with the Chinese and English speeches, followed by a sharing section by our guest speakers on their specialized topic pertinent to our theme today. And we'll finish with the Q&A section. We would like to thank Radio Hong Kong yet again for sending in their sign language interpreters. We're very lucky to have them with us every time indeed. 開始之前就請台上發言人俾記者嘅影相，麻煩起身。係麻煩發言人望向左手邊。係麻煩人望向中間。係麻煩人再望向右手邊。好，唔該晒，各位發言人請就座。咁我哋會由我哋嘅中文 speaker 開始發言。
革命未竟，疫情未定，政權依舊冥頑不靈，對民意視若無睹，置民生不顧，繼續極盡殘害香港人。近日反民主派嘅議員頻頻出頭獻媚，希望推動23條立法，謊稱能夠維護他國安全。23條對香港人嚟講係一個夢魘。言論係我哋敢於以死相搏嘅一項自由。袁國勇教授尋日朝早喺明報上敢於批評，喺同一晚就喺深圳位置入邊低頭認錯撤稿，判若兩人，不禁令人心寒。23條未正式立法，但係已經達到噤聲之用。極權面前，連公義同科學都只能夠勞顏卑失，讓路於橫蠻同愚昧。17年前，我哋守過一仗；17年後，即使惡法重臨，相信香港人亦都有足夠嘅智慧同勇氣去將惡法推倒。但可怕嘅係23條，除咗可以以單一條例形式立法，亦都可以透過強行解釋，扭曲現行不同條例，僭建式立法。種種舊時惡法可被援引作為對極權眼中危害國家安全嘅行為而借屍還魂，迫害抗爭者。港共政權早於6年前已經援引過條文粗疏嘅沉睡惡法，訴控並污名化抗爭者。2014年雨傘革命以公安條例起訴黃之鋒等人非法集結及煽動行為。2016年魚蛋革命以公安條例入邊嘅暴動或煽惑暴動等罪名，首次起訴梁天琦同一眾義士。其後又以社團條例禁止香港民族黨運作。過去大半年，魔警同律政司濫用暴動罪名控訴數百名抗爭者，迫使抗爭者喺未經判罪之下接受嚴苛嘅保釋條件，嚴重侵害其人身嘅自由。公安條例已於1967年為使策動67暴動嘅共產暴徒更易入罪，條例取消咗共同目的作為重要控罪元素，即係話，不論行過、路過，一旦出現喺現場，亦都能夠控以此罪，以平定政治風波而修訂嘅舊法，成為政權打壓異見者最方便嘅工具。 另外，公安條例關於非法集結以及暴動嘅條文，詞性含糊不清，控罪所謂嘅破壞社會安寧，並冇指涉及實質舉動或者係暴動嘅行為，淪為政治濫告嘅手段。含糊不清嘅條文造成寬鬆嘅指引，給予警方過高嘅權力執法。唔單止係咁，政權喺舊年為咗繞過立法程序，援引咗殖民統治時期制定嘅緊急法，以行政嘅手段啟用禁蒙面法，不擇手段咁去打壓抗爭。雖然最後禁蒙面法被判違憲，並且將佢推倒，但以行政嘅手段去左右司法系統嘅舉止，創下咗極壞嘅先例。政權現時繼續以上述嘅過時舊例，以中國式法治嘅幌子，喺欠缺現代人權考慮同真正法治嘅修訂下，繼續濫告抗爭者，以法例嘅名目行維護國安。喺現時濫用暴動嘅罪名之下，有無辜嘅市民被還押咗超過2個半月，先因為證據不足而撤銷控罪，重獲自由。足見種種舊例唔單止令無數嘅人嘅自由受到限制，喺收押所白白虛度咗大好嘅年華，更加令到本應獨立嘅司法機關淪為政權爪牙。日前，鄧炳強高調咁受訪，稱佢以聯合國反恐怖主義措施條例檢控早前爆炸品案被告。若此話成真，將會係呢條例成立18年以嚟首次嘅提告。呢次嘅手段非常之明顯，係極權政府再進一步咁對內打壓香港人，對外污名化香港人追求民主嘅意念。按現時嘅反恐條例，政權一旦鎖定咗你係目標嘅犯人，就能夠以極高嘅權限作出控罪同禁制。如果你被懷疑作所謂恐怖分子或持有指明目的，作出策劃、籌備、參與一項或多於一項所謂恐怖主義行為，即使實際上係並沒有發生，條例入面給予執法者權力凍結市民財產、禁止市民出入境等。但現行嘅法例足見詞義嘅粗疏，即使實際上冇恐怖主義行為發生，係開宗明義令政權可以砌詞造假，連莫須有嘅罪證都慳返，以恐怖主義嘅名義合理化魔警禁錮異己等等嘅惡行。立法會曾經作出報告，香港受恐襲嘅威脅評估被評為中度級別，冇具體嘅情報顯示香港係可能成為襲擊目標。喺客觀嘅情況之下，動用反恐條例控告示威者，純粹係赤裸而卑劣嘅政治打壓。再者，控罪本身應該由律政司去提告，而鄧炳強高調嘅受訪已經證明香港法治最高嘅權力已經交到黑警嘅手上，香港確實已經淪為警察國家。近日，警方亦派代表到聯合國顛倒是非，為過去嘅暴行砌詞狡辯。警方密鑼緊鼓咁去洗白，同埋近月嚟恐怖主義嘅言論，唔難令人猜想到政權想以公權力向外國政府同埋公民抹黑香港人嘅抗爭運動，意圖令香港人失去追求公義民主嘅形象。 影響國際嘅輿論。同時，按反恐條例2017年修訂版，政權能夠隨時禁止相關人士離境，不單止禁錮其人身自由，更影響咗香港人出國、參與國際會議、進行遊說等等嘅工作，打擊表達自由同國際戰線。警方借用國際社會熟悉嘅字眼，污蔑香港人嘅行徑，意圖喺外國執法部門面前爭取認同，合理化打壓暴行。即使係國際公民雪亮嘅雙眼面前，警方呢一個舉動未必能夠奏效，但都希望香港人能夠多加提防同反擊，盡量喺社交平台上澄清同道出真相。中共自古以嚟就污名民主、戰視人權，新疆西藏前車可鑑。面對人民爭取合法權益充耳不聞，人民不滿就動輒扣帽子反恐，以反恐製造恐怖，以人民嘅怨懟痛苦換取權貴嘅紙醉金迷。回顧香港現行嘅法例，有唔少嘅舊例因為時移世易，亦都風塵已久。但係港共傀儡隨時以修訂、解讀等等嘅伎倆，舊例新用，殘文後快。抗疫嘅2003年同抗命嘅2003年，香港人都唔敢遺忘。議事廳堂早就淪為港共嘅屠房，磨刀霍霍。喺魔警律政嘅配合之下，不惜一切打壓抗爭。但香港人早已經唔一樣，我哋唔再懦弱，我哋絕對唔會屈服。即使係花果凋零，我哋都唔會忘記革命同義務。無論係民土戰線、議會戰線，亦或係文宣戰線、國際戰線，都仍然會繼續有我哋嘅脈搏，抗擊暴政，光復香港。
Under the colour of law, on the invocation of anti-terrorism ordinance against peace. The 5 demands of the Hong Kong protests, one of which was the retraction of the riot characterization to preserve judicial independence in Hong Kong, while reflecting the UN's internationally recognized freedom of assembly protection laws and right to protest for global citizens, have been the fundamental goal of our pro-democracy struggle. Hong Kong protesters aren't rioters, they're freedom fighters. This is one of our earliest and most persistent protest chants, because it is a truth we seek to hammer home to anyone who still does not understand that everyone is born with the right to free speech and the right to protest when things are not right. The Hong Kong and Beijing authorities, sadly, are just as persistent as we are in dismantling, destroying, demolishing every pillar of universal human rights and values under the colour of law, both local and international. It is amusing to see how outlaws speak about legality and how terrorists themselves speak about counter-terrorism. On a very recent case of homemade bomb discovery, the police chief, Chris Tang Ping Kung, has declared that they may charge the accused with the United Nations Anti-Terrorism Measures Ordinance. It would be the first deployment of this UN Act on a court case since its enactment 18 years ago. This maneuver is yet another threat to politically persecute and prosecute Hong Kongers and to slander our fight for democracy and freedom, the fight for our homeland to the international audience. We need to emphasize here that the authorities have, time and again, illegitimately and unconstitutionally activated powers to criminalize the exercise of guaranteed human rights. According to the latest revision of the Act, once authorities have targeted you as a suspect, they could execute near prerogative authority to impose charges and injunctions upon you. Terms on the Act are loosely defined and are thus open to abuse and exploitation by knavish regimes. You could be identified as a suspected terrorist or having been involved with clear intention in the devisal, planning, preparation, or participation of terrorism any moment they deem fit, without the instance of terrorism having taken place. The accusations would run on pure speculations, saving the authorities the need to fabricate evidence around your case, and the sly measures with which they still bother today. The police and the judiciary, who are all too willing to cooperate and act as a proxy under Beijing, would legitimize their continued crimes against dissidents under the color of law. A report by the Legislative Council of Hong Kong has marked the risk of Hong Kong being subject to terrorist attacks as medium. There is currently no sign or intelligence pointing towards Hong Kong being a target for terrorism. Against this backdrop, the use of this anti-terrorism legislation against protesters and political dissidents can only be pure political oppression. Moreover, judicial matters and queries should be handled by the Department of Justice. The fact that it was the police chief that spoke denotes that the highest legal power in Hong Kong has been handed down to the police force, the very group of people who have been terrorizing Hong Kongers ever since June 2019 and began the era of the police state. Locally, in Hong Kong, the pro-democracy movement is still ongoing, determinedly on a parallel track of the yet unsettled COVID-19 threat. While the city is still knee-deep in a whole spectrum of pressing crises, the regime turns to fiddle with the ratification of Article 23, with which any act of treason, succession, sedition, subversion against the Central People's Government, as well as ties with foreign political organizations, will be prohibited by law. Nothing that the Hong Kong authorities have done serves to defend the interests of Hong Kongers. Rather, it only serves to preserve the integrity of the ruling power and the so-called national security of the totalitarian state north of the river. We have fought away the enactment of Article 23 once, already in 2003, and we have faith that we will drive away the return of this already mummified legislative proposal with wisdom and courage once more. However, we worry that the most notorious parts of Article 23 will be excised and through processes of interpretation and amendment slipped into existing laws. The rule of law would become no more, and rule by law will prevail, with the implementation of Article 23 or its alternative in any form. Political imprisonment would be imminent for all. As early as 6 years ago, the Hong Kong authorities already displayed their penchant for prosecuting and vilifying dissidents by manipulating legal terms and resurrecting dead laws. The use of the Public Order Ordinance against Joshua Wong and company for the 2014 Umbrella Revolution, and once again against Edward Leung in 2016, followed by the usage of the Society's Ordinance to exterminate the Hong Kong National Party, run by Chan Ho-tin, are only precursors to the yet larger scale political persecutions we are seeing today against pro-democracy protesters by arbitrarily charging them with rioting and forcing them into accepting harsh terms for bail before and without trial. The Public Order Ordinance was drafted in 1967 for the purpose of incriminating rioters instigated by communists. The ordinance omitted the criminal elements of a common purpose for the offences of illegal assembly and riot. Anyone who appeared at the scene could be charged. The ambiguity of the criminal elements has given the police excessive power to enforce the law. What started as a draconian law to resolve a public order crisis has become the most convenient tool for the regime to suppress its dissidents. Besides, provisions relating to these offences are ambiguous and ill-defined. For example, a breach of the peace does not necessarily involve any actual conduct or rioting acts. Such offences have only become a means for political persecution. Just months ago, in order to bypass the legislative process, the government invoked the colonial emergency laws to enact the anti-mask regulation in an attempt to further suppress the protest movement, a measure which was eventually deemed unconstitutional, at least for now. Relying on an archaic ordinance and disregarding the need for revising this law because of modern human rights concerns, the government has carried on persecuting protesters in full Chinese-style rule-by-law fashion. Countless protesters have since wasted weeks or even months in custody with their liberty deprived. More recently, representatives were sent out by the Hong Kong police force to the United Nations Human Rights Council, joining a laughable collection of member states like Venezuela, Pakistan, Libya, DR Congo, and many more with questionable human rights records that ironically occupy seats on the UNHRC, to distort right from wrong and defend their brutal and war crime-like behavior. Noting the recent whitewashing and terrorism labeling, it is not hard to imagine the regime's plot to defame Hong Kong's movement in the eyes of foreign governments and citizens by tarnishing the image of desire for justice and democracy, and influence popular opinions in the international community. Furthermore, under the Anti-Terrorism Measures Ordinance, amended in 2017, anyone deemed by the regime as a terrorist can be prohibited from leaving the territory, restraining one's individual freedom, placing severe limitations on attending conventions, and international lobbying efforts of Hong Kongers. Rhetorics familiar to the international community were used by the Hong Kong police force to blemish the name of the pro-democracy movement and to gain recognition from foreign administrations for their brutal suppression of human rights. Although the international community may be lucid and educated about the truth, the Chinese communists have evidently ramped up their propaganda campaign. That is why we are speaking here today and urging all to guard against the Chinese state propaganda and keep the truth afloat. The Chinese Communist Party's stigmatization of pro-civil rights movements is anything but a first-time occurrence. The world has seen what happened in Xinjiang and Tibet, the same brutal repression of dissidents in the name of anti-terrorism and fear-mongering the public with their so-called localist terrorism discourse. While the police force serves as the militant front line against protesters in Hong Kong, archaic and often human rights violating laws can be mobilized against pro-democracy endeavors. Hong Kongers must not forget about the dozens of sharp blades already upon our neck. The Hong Kong government, a CCP puppet government, has long been sharpening its sword and is actively looking out for opportunities to kill off voices of dissent with aid from the police force and the teetering judiciary. We are not lambs. When dictatorship is a fact, revolution becomes a duty. Hong Kongers must not sit around and wait to be slaughtered. Just as we know where the virus originated from, we all know too well who the actual terrorists are. Our leadership is set on a war on peace, slandering freedoms and peace-loving citizens on the international stage. But if you have ever been to a demonstration in Hong Kong, then you'll understand that it is the protesters who protect civilians. It is the protesters who show the most humanity to each other, and the locals and the visitors alike. It is the protesters who are the first to rush up and help those in need, giving them all that they have. You can hear it in their words and in their eyes that they are the ones who love Hong Kong more than they love their own lives. Therefore, the banner that we fly in the name of universal values and democracy will not be tainted as the CCP attempts to save its lost legitimacy with its people by demonstrating international prowess, infiltrating multinational institutions and establishments, and bribing its way through. We shall reclaim the discourse evermore and consolidate our voices among the international community and actively lobby for support from our international friends with whom we stand together as victims or yet gallant fighters against Chinese totalitarianism.
跟住落嚟，我哋會有眾志國際組成員黃奕武先生我哋發言。喺發言之前，我哋都想多謝翻我哋今日嘅場地提供 Librarian HK。First will be our guest speaker, Demosisto International Division Member Mr. Wang Yifmo. Mr. Wang.
Claudia 講先係咪？Claudia 講先。
sorry，我哋會改咗會係由香港人權監察代表葉歡柔小姐幫我哋講先嘅。Following will be our guest speaker, Hong Kong Human Rights Monitor Representative Ms. Claudia Yip. Before that, we would like to thank our venue, Librarian Hong Kong today. Ms. Claudia, please.
Thank you， 唔該晒。首先再一次多謝民間記者會邀請香港人權監察嚟到呢一個記招上面分享我哋意見啦，多謝佢哋籌備呢一個記招嘅。香港人權監察咧就住相信大家都留意到啦，警方喺3月頭嘅時候咧派咗代表去聯合國人權理事會嗰度發言嘅。人權監察對於警方呢一個發言咧表示非常之嘅遺憾，因為警方竟然將佢哋嘅大話咧可以衝出國際去到聯合國嗰度去講。警方喺個會上面講話咧，警隊被指控警暴係因為一啲以暴力勒索政府去爭取訴求嘅人刻意去抹黑警隊。事實上，無論係國際嘅人權組織、本地嘅人權組織、本地或者係國際嘅傳媒機構，都記錄到好多有系統嘅警方嘅使用暴力、濫用權力嘅事件。連聯合國高級人權事務專員亦都曾經係多次發表呢一個嘅文章啦，去指出有呢一個情況。唔通人權組織、聯合國全部都係別有用心咁樣去抹黑警隊咩？警隊佢係一而再、再而三咁樣拒絕承認自己嘅問題，反而咁樣無論喺本地甚至去到國際嘅場地，都咁樣去講大話，嘗試去掩飾佢嘅行為，但係同時完全冇採取任何嘅行動措施去停止、去壓止呢一啲嘅警暴行為。呢一個係十分可恥、卑劣嘅行為。另外想回應嘅係警方喺近日嘅一個報章嘅採訪入面去表示話，考慮緊使用反恐條例去檢控近日嘅一啲炸彈案嘅人士。首先澄清翻啦，佢係講緊考慮緊檢控啦，同埋係同律政司討論緊要唔要咁樣去檢控。暫時嗰個提出嗰個控罪咧，都仍然係以刑事條例入面嘅罪行去提出。但係警方而家咁樣去提出話要以反恐條例去檢控呢一個個案咧，人權監察係表示非常之嘅憂慮。呢一個反恐條例咧，當初去訂立嘅時候咧，嗰個過程係非常之嘅倉促咯，係冇充足嘅呢一個consultation 嘅，係冇充足嘅一個諮詢嘅過程，亦都係被批評咧入面嗰個對於恐怖主義行為嘅定義咧係過闊。 但係當佢係一個咁闊嘅條例嘅時候咧，佢嗰個帶嚟嘅刑事罪行嗰個結果、嗰個後果啦、嗰個懲罰咧係非常之係嚴重，亦都係俾咗檢控部門或者執法部門呢一啲更加強嘅權力去跟進呢一啲嘅個案。呢一個係製造咗一個好大嘅漏洞啦，去俾政府去侵犯人權嘅。咁我哋參考翻一啲外國嘅經驗啦，佢哋都知道咧，如果係用一啲反恐嘅條例去打壓或者去處理一啲嘅抗爭嘅行為，其實而當中咧，如果係涉及一啲過度嘅侵犯人權啦，又或者係一啲過度嘅反應啦，其實係反而係會火上加油啦，令到個抗爭咧係更加嘅劇烈啦，亦都係持續地係會令到被針對嘅一個族群咧係感到係被排拒於外嘅。呢一啲嘅經驗咧，其實喺外國已經見到。咁點解香港政府咧，或者係警隊咧，點解佢仲要去考慮用咁樣嘅方法去處理咧？睇翻外國嘅經驗咧，如果係出現咁樣嘅譬如用炸彈咁樣嘅事件啦，佢哋都係睇翻係要解決翻個問題嘅根本，而唔係用一啲嚴刑嘅苛法去處理嘅。咁此外啦，警方佢而家聲稱話去考慮用反恐條例去檢控一啲嘅抗爭者，其實亦都同佢哋過去一段時間嘗試喺揾一啲少用舊有可能極少使用嘅一啲法例咧，去檢控抗爭者咧，亦都係同出一轍嘅。佢過去譬如使用呢一個公眾妨擾罪啦，呢一個普通法入面嘅罪行去檢控佔中九子，令到佢係喺一個嘅事件發生之後好耐嘅一段時間先至提出檢控，而且嗰個罪行呢後果咧，亦都係相比起喺Public Order Ordinance 入面嘅罪行咧係更加嚴重。另外咧，亦都用譬如社團條例啦，去令到民族黨咧係不能夠繼續存在。而呢一個社團條例咧，事實上喺聯合國嘅人權事務委員會1999年嘅就住香港嘅審議結論入面，已經批評咗係一個侵害人權嘅法例，但係警方竟然仍然都係繼續去使用。如此種種咧，亦都係顯示出警方咧佢係不斷，警方啦、檢控方啦不斷去揾一啲工具出嚟去打壓示威者，但係佢喺處理警方違法嘅時候咧，就完全唔見呢一種嘅決心，完全唔見呢一種嘅創意。佢去使用一啲現行嘅法例，已經係造成咁大嘅傷害。假如真係好似一啲嘅人士，佢話要去立23條嘅時候，相信到時候對於香港嘅人權狀況咧，會係更加大嘅一個挑戰，更加大嘅傷害。咁我暫時講到呢一度，我交俾阿毛。
唔係講英文。
係，跟住我會用英文講翻一次。So, thank you for inviting us, the Hong Kong Human Rights Monitor, to this press conference. Hong Kong Human Rights Monitor regrets the Hong Kong police speech at the United Nations Human Rights Council in early March. We find that it is shameless for them to be lying so blatantly at the United Nations, at the international arena. They said that they were smeared by people with ulterior purposes when they say the police have been violating the law and using brutality. It is absurd because international and local human rights organizations and international and domestic media organizations, they have all captured cases of police brutality. Even the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights have issued statements criticizing the Hong Kong government and the Hong Kong police for their violation of the law and for their violation of the rules on the use of less lethal weapons, etc. Are these people, are these organizations, are these entities smearing the police with an ulterior purpose? We find that the police is extremely shameless in making such statements, and we deeply regret that. We also regret the police commissioner's comment that they are considering using the anti-terrorism ordinance to prosecute some bombing cases. We find that it is extremely dangerous because the ordinance has been criticized for being broad and vague and with the definition of terrorist act, and it is potentially a very large loophole for violation of human rights. And we also regret that it is in fact an extension of what the police or the prosecutions have been doing in the past years in prosecuting or persecuting political dissidents or activists. They have been actively, creatively digging out archaic laws to apply to these cases involving democratic movement. In fact, these laws, some of them have been explicitly criticized by the United Nations as well. For example, the Society Ordinance used to ban the National Party of Hong Kong. It has been criticized by the Human Rights Committee overseeing the ICCPR in 1999. And also using fake laws such as rioting, a very broad catch-all offense with severe consequence, is also criticized by the Human Rights Committee in its considering of the General Comment 37. The police threatened to use the anti-terrorism ordinance to prosecute certain activists for creating bombs. That is very dangerous because it would give the police extra powers in handling these cases, and also it would be the first case to try to expand the definition of terrorist act to pro-democracy activism or other activities related to protest. And since the government and the police, they are already so actively using existing laws to try to persecute, and while the police have been so actively and creatively trying to prosecute protesters with laws, they have not applied the same determination in prosecuting police officers who have been violating the law, who have been committing torture or other crimes against protesters and general citizens. We deeply regret that. And if the government can have its way of passing Article 23 law on national security, that would put Hong Kong's human rights protection into further danger. And now I'll pass to Mary to
跟住落嚟，我哋會有眾志國際組嘅成員黃奕武先生為我哋發言。Further will be our Democracy International Division member Mr. Wong Yik-mo. Mr. Wong, please.
首先多謝主辦單位民間記招請我嚟分享下我哋嘅工作嘅經驗。 咁喺即係最近我哋係觀察到嘅一個即係警察去到聯合國嗰邊發言咧，咁我哋見到嘅其實係一個好簡單嘅事情，就係一個真相同埋謊言嘅角力。點解中國咧要擺咁多心思喺聯合國嗰邊？咁我哋都知道中國係用咗好多去資助聯合國，佢而家係晉升為即係第二大嘅國家啦，即係超過咗日本咁樣。咁係因為聯合國係一個平台，咁佢本身就冇一個傾向。咁但係中國咧就希望咧將自己影響力喺聯合國嗰邊係擺更加多影響力，因為咧西方國家即係以我哋自己所知啦，西方國家好多時遇到呢啲conflict 嘅時候咧，佢哋希望係用啲文明、即係啲和平嘅方式去處理，用體制內嘅方式去處理。咁所以中國咧，咁佢就喺聯合國嗰邊咁樣做啦。咁都因為即係中國即係而家有錢，咁我哋見到中國除咗喺聯合國，佢哋都喺世界各地用錢嚟買佢嘅影響力。咁啊，世衛係一個好好嘅例子啦。咁啊，幫中國掩飾咗好多嘅錯誤。咁但係唔係中國喺呢個聯合國嗰邊咁樣做咧，佢就可以得逞咧？咁當然相信大家都知唔係嘅。咁根據我哋嘅經驗咧，可以同大家分享民間同埋政府方面嘅一啲反應啦。相信有出到去外國嘅人啦，即係無論係去美加多啦，或者歐洲啦、澳洲啦，其實大家去嘅經驗咧，都會話俾你知，就係同一般嘅市民去傾偈嘅時候咧，去溝通嘅時候咧，其實大部分嘅人係知道香港嘅抗爭嘅，因為咧國際嘅媒體啦，已經將所有嘅事情報導出嚟，咁咧就唔係一個3分鐘嘅演講可以掩蓋嘅嘢嚟嘅。其實喺智利或者係歐洲嘅一啲抗爭嘅抗爭者啦，咁佢哋都有去學習香港我哋嘅 Be Water 嘅一個精神，去學習我哋冇大台，我哋點樣係可以即係好 flexible 咁樣去進行抗爭啦。咁有啲唔同嘅團體啦、NGO 啦，咁有啲大學啦，都會邀請好多香港嘅抗爭者又好、學者又好，去到出邊去分享我哋喺香港嘅抗爭，無論係理念或者做法。尤其咧係即係想學習香港如何可以動員到成200萬人上街，之後持續成10個月，去到而家係10個月嘅一個抗爭。咁所以呢啲嘢咧係話咗俾大家知道，其實國際嘅民間咧，佢哋係清楚了解發生咩事嘅。咁除咗民間之外，好重要嘅就係政府，佢哋點樣睇？嗱，咁其實政府咧，就佢有領事館啦，佢哋有大使館啦，甚至有啲係會有情報機關。咁所以其實我哋唔使擔心佢哋唔知嘅。我哋上年去咗歐盟嘅議會啦，去咗法國、比利時，或者今年去咗北歐嘅3國。咁其實我哋喺聽證會，又或者係私下嘅一啲會面開會嗰邊咧，各黨派嘅議員咧，其實佢哋係希望係掌握更加多香港啲警暴嘅資訊啦，一啲人道危機嘅資訊啦，甚至乎即係而家比較近期就會即係開始討論，即係如果佢哋個制裁真係要做嘅話，咁制裁嘅對象係邊啲人？咁呢個事情咧就話俾大家知咧，其實外國政府咧，佢哋即係最基本嘅嘢，佢哋係掌握嘅。咁佢哋咧係對香港，甚至對中國，佢哋個態度其實係支持香港嘅。咁所以咧就唔會因為我哋嘅呢個副警務處長啦，去聯合國嗰邊講3分鐘嘅大話，咁啊相信。咁畢竟咧，咁中國嘅一個propaganda， 咁啊全世界係聞名嘅。呢排最出名嘅就係、當然係武漢嘅肺炎啦。咁佢而家甚至講到係美國傳過嚟嘅，咁係咪大家就會信呢？咁我哋見到中國係全世界花咁大嘅力去講大話，咁出邊點樣去回應呢？相信大家係記得呢一幅圖嘅，呢個係丹麥嘅 Jyllands-Posten， 咁佢哋應該係1月尾嗰陣時做咗呢個報紙就登咗呢一幅圖。 咁啊受到中國嘅批評啦，強烈批評啦。咁丹麥方面咧，其實佢哋唔會因為同即係經濟壓力驚咗中國，就唔敢繼續咁樣做嘅。相反，其實咧丹麥方面咧係好希望，因為丹麥都係佢哋新聞自由指數都應該全世界排名第5嘅，咁多年都係差唔多。咁佢哋係非常之驕傲，即係對於佢哋嘅傳媒去報導真相。咁中國去批評完之後，其實我哋又見到德國嘅明鏡週刊，呢個應該係2月嘅，冇記錯嘅話。咁呢個就唔係淨係用一幅圖去諷刺咁簡單，佢直情寫埋 Made in China。係啦，咁最近嘅中國就話送口罩俾意大利啦，呢個新聞。咁意大利嘅呢個前通訊部長兼且係參議員Maurizio Gasparri，咁佢都出聲就話佢哋嗰啲純粹係一個交易嘅關係，就唔係中國送嘅。所以我哋見到係全世界其實佢哋都係對抗緊一個中國嗰邊嘅一個 propaganda， 佢哋嘅假新聞或者係一啲謊言咁樣嘅。咁最後都係想話，其實我哋而家咧就真係打緊一個輿論戰。我哋嘅國際戰線咧，喺未來咧係非常之重要嘅一個戰線啦。無論係輿論戰或者係講緊真相同埋謊言嘅角力都好，其實我哋見到中國咁努力去打嘅時候，我哋更加要知道中國都願意擺咁多資源喺度，證明佢嘅重要性。所以我哋都係要非常之努力咁樣做好我哋嘅嗰一部分。德國納粹嗰陣時，有一個好出名嘅quote 叫做 Eine Lüge muss nur oft genug wiederholt werden, dann wird sie geglaubt。咁嘅意思就係話咧，當你講大話嘅時候，你只要講夠多次，咁啲人就會開始相信你講嘅呢個大話。李文亮醫生為咗講真話而付出生命，歷史上邊有無數嘅人為咗報導真相，可能尤其係媒體啦，而犧牲自己嘅生命。所以真相咧係無價嘅。咁真相亦係我哋係爭取公義嘅時候必不可少嘅一樣嘢。極權咧往往咧就懼怕真相。我哋見到中國禁止美國3個好大嘅傳媒喺中國包括喺香港嘅工作啦。咁我哋睇得出中國係幾咁懼怕真相。咁所以咧，我哋就更加要令到呢啲真相流傳萬世，俾全世界知道。國際戰線咧就唔係靠幾個人去華盛頓、去布魯塞爾、去歐洲、去澳洲咁樣講幾句嘢。國際戰線咧其實咧係靠咁多嘅手足，咁多個月以嚟引起國際關注，我哋先有機會去到出邊同出邊嘅人去溝通。咁所以喺呢度呼籲大家咧繼續努力。有啲咩可以做咧？包括可能喺 Twitter 啦，比較多外國人睇嘅地方嘅平台，去繼續去講呢啲真相出去。咁希望大家係各自喺自己嘅戰場上面努力。Okay, now I recap in English. So from the recent incident that we can observe a battle between truth and lies. Why China needs to spend so much resources in the UN is because China knows UN is the platform that the West tends to use to make it peaceful, to try to use peaceful means within the institute to solve the problems. A very good example is the WHO, which has covered up so many lies for China. But from our experiences that we can share from the international community and their reactions to Hong Kong protests, what I have to say, in the international community, it's fairly well informed and reported of the situation in Hong Kong. Foreign social movements, for example in Chile, for example in Europe, they learn from Hong Kong, from our be water spirit. And in fact, many NGOs, INGOs and universities, they have invited Hong Kongers protesters, academics, to share their experiences on the reasons behind our protests, on the means, on the why we have to, how we have come to 10 months of protests. And therefore, the international community, they are informed of the truth, regardless of China's effort to cover up the truth. And the reaction from the foreign governments is very similar. Foreign governments have their own means to fetch information, for example, through the diplomatic missions or even through the intelligence agents. Well, we have visited the EU and Scandinavian states in the past months. In hearings in the parliament and in meetings with MPs from different parties, we have been asked many times to provide more concrete cases or reports about police violence or humanitarian crisis. And very recently, they even talk about the sanction list for the potential targeted sanction on Hong Kong. So therefore, they will not believe in what the Deputy Commissioner Oscar Kwok said in mere 3 minutes, and all the lies. Propaganda is probably the most famous made in China. I regret saying this. Very recently, China lied about the coronavirus to come from the US. And in January, Jyllands-Posten from Denmark, they have reported, well, you have seen this, they've reported, they've used a picture to criticize China. And then, of course, they are also criticized by China for such acts. And 1 month later, that was in January, and this is in February, Der Spiegel from Germany, they even made a cover, made in China, coronavirus. So we can see the international community is also trying very hard to rebut China by telling the truth. And only yesterday, Italian Senator Maurizio Gaspari also spoke against China's claim that China has provided the essential coronavirus supplies to Italy. He said it's merely trade. So to conclude, I would like to call for more action by the Hong Kong public, and not just in Hong Kong, but people in the whole world, Hong Kongers who live abroad. We can see the international front is an important battlefield that's coming. So we have to, there's somewhere that we need to pay effort in. There's a famous quote from Nazi Germany, "Eine Lüge muss nur oft genug wiederholt werden, dann wird sie geglaubt." It says, a lie simply needs to be repeated enough times, then it will be believed. And that is exactly why we have to repeat the truth, not just once, but to tell the world about what happened. Dr. Li Wenliang from China paid the price to tell the truth about coronavirus outbreak back in December. And many people sacrifice their lives in history just to tell the truth. The truth is priceless, and it is an essential element should we still wish to fight for justice. Authoritarianism fears the truth. And we can see that China banning Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and Washington Post personnel in China and in Hong Kong. We can see how much China fears the truth. And therefore, we should safeguard the right to speak truth. International front does not count on a few quote-unquote elites who can fly to Washington, D.C., who can fly to Brussels. Instead, international front counts on every one of you, everyone from Hong Kong, and everyone in any corner of the world. So our advice will be continue to post the truth on your, say, Twitter account or other social media platforms and tell your friends, tell people about it. Keep up the good work on your own front. Thank you.
Excuse me, I will elaborate a bit more about the application of the anti-terrorism ordinance. I'll speak in English first and then summarize in Cantonese. So, about anti-terrorism law, internationally there have been a lot of comments that the law can only be applied to genuine terrorist act. It cannot be, in other words, it must not be exploited to be applied to any act that is short of terrorism. That's why when the police commissioner said that they would consider using the anti-terrorism law to prosecute the bombing cases, that's very concerning because, first of all, those cases, they can already be prosecuted under crimes ordinance. It does not need the anti-terrorism ordinance to hold them accountable to the law. And the crimes ordinance already provide for very severe punishment for such act. So there is no need for police to actually use this anti-terrorism law. But what's the danger here we are facing is that the police or the DOJ, they can be trying to broaden or to test how broad the definition of a terrorist act can be under Hong Kong law. And with a broad definition of terrorist act, all the parts of the anti-terrorism ordinance can be applied, such as freezing of accounts, freezing of assets, forfeiting of assets, and also banning people from traveling or recruiting people into organizations if they can say that that organization is a terrorist organization. These will inevitably affect a lot of fundamental rights, such as our rights to property, our rights to freedom of movement, or our rights to freedom of association. And from international experience, such exploitation of anti-terrorism law would, first of all, would demonize activists or demonize a fraction of the people. It does not help with resolving the problem at all. Also, internationally, it has been recognized that countries have been trying to use this kind of anti-terrorism or national security or combating radical movements, etc., to sweep away human rights protections. It has already caught international attention, and Hong Kong government, Hong Kong has been always proud of its protection of human rights as much as what it means. It is absurd, or it is very dangerous for the police or the DOJ to use this, to exploit the anti-terrorism law in this current case. The Hong Kong Human Rights Monitor will alert the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights while countering terrorism about the police threat to use this law in this case. And now I will speak in Cantonese. 就住警方佢話要用反恐條例去檢控炸彈案呢，咁我有以下嘅一啲嘅補充嘅，就係其實國際上啦，無論係譬如歐洲議會又或者係聯合國嘅一啲嘅人權專家咧，佢哋都指出啦， 反恐呢一個條例只能夠應用於真正嘅恐怖主義嘅行為，而不能夠去嘗試去濫用呢一啲嘅法例、呢一啲嘅相應嘅權力咧去處理並非恐怖主義嘅行為嘅。咁而警方所指嗰個炸彈案啦，事實上佢亦都係已經以刑事條例去作出檢控啦。咁而刑事條例咧，亦都係就住呢一啲嘅行為咧，係有非常嚴厲嘅懲罰，所以係不存在話唔用反恐條例咧，就不能夠將涉事嘅人士繩之於法咁樣嘅情況，所以係根本冇必要咧去喺呢一個個案入面咧去使用反恐條例。反而咧，去今次如果去使用反恐條例咧，一個非常危險嘅後果就係佢可以用嚟去測試反恐條例入面對於恐怖主義行為嗰個定義咧，可以有幾闊。咁而如果佢真係成功將呢一個恐怖主義行為嘅定義咧係拉闊嘅時候，咁呢個條例入面其他嘅部分咧就會成真啦。咁譬如涉及恐怖主義行為嘅資產會被凍結啦，會被沒收啦，又或者係你要去如果佢話你係去外國去受訓去做一啲恐怖主義行為嘅，或者呢個目的嘅，或者去籌劃嘅，佢就已經可以禁止你去出國，你可以禁止你去離開香港。又或者係如果佢話你個組織係涉及恐怖主義目的嘅，咁你就佢就唔呢個組織就唔可以去招募成員。呢一啲咧，其實都係一定係會涉及一啲我哋好重要嘅權利啦，譬如保障私有財產嘅權利、自由行動嘅權利啦，同埋呢一個結社嘅權利等等嘅。咁而從即係其實從國際嘅經驗上咧，去即係濫用反恐條例去檢控呢啲嘅個案咧，亦都係有好大嘅反彈嘅可能啦。佢首先佢係即係惡魔化呢一啲嘅成員，其實係根本係即係從國際經驗上係無助於解決個真正嘅問題。咁而其實國際上亦都對於有好多國家咧去嘗試用國家安全啦，又或者係消滅一啲極端主義咧，去作為防止去侵犯人權，去消除對一啲人權嘅保障咧，其實國際社會已經係非常嘅重視啦，亦都係好警惕呢一啲咁嘅做法嘅。咁所以即係警隊Police Commissioner 佢而喺呢一個時候，佢咁樣講話要用反恐條例去檢控一啲抗爭者咧，呢一個係即係係正正就係國際上去警惕嘅一啲嘅人士咯。咁亦都係同即係香港政府佢一向聲稱話佢係好保障人權嘅一個做法咧，係大相庭徑。咁而人權監察咧，即將會就住警隊佢呢一個嘅威脅要使用反恐條例去檢控抗爭者咧，我哋會寫信過去俾聯合國嘅特別報告員，聯合國嘅反恐期間人權保障嘅特別報告員，去告知佢有呢一個咁樣嘅做法同埋有呢個發展嘅。
好，唔該晒兩位嘉賓。咁跟住落嚟，我哋會嚟到我哋問答嘅環節。咁因為時間有限啦，所以請每間報館問唔多於2條嘅問題，並且喺問之前報一報自己係邊間報館嘅。We will now have the Q&A sections of the day. Due to the limited time that we have today, we would like to ask each of the journalists on the ground to pose no more than 2 questions at a time. And please to give us your affiliation as well before your question. Thank you.
呢兩日我係大紀元嘅記者。呢兩日見到英國路透社出咗一篇新聞係話據可靠消息咧，即係喺反送中期間咧，有大陸咧輸入咗4000個武警嚟係換入咗香港警隊，前線監察同埋甚至係執法嘅。你覺得呢個如果屬實嘅話，係咪有冇影響到 基本法入面嗰啲對人權嘅關事啊，
係人權監察 Claudia， 咁我可能好簡短咁樣答一答。都留意到呢一個報導嘅，咁亦都留意到咧，警方佢出咗個聲明去否認有呢一個情況啦。咁其實如果嗰個報導嘅情況係屬實，即係有一啲武警咧係滲入咗喺警員嗰度，無論係做觀察又好，又或者即係你都唔信佢去到真係淨係做觀察啦。咁佢哋可能亦都係着住警隊嘅制服咁樣。咁佢哋中間有冇做任何嘅行為？咁點樣可以令即係一方面就係如果佢哋係有濫用暴力濫用權力啦，又或者係使用暴力嘅情況咧，其實香港市民係完全冇辦法去作出跟進。一嚟佢哋一定唔會有一個真嘅一個標示翻佢哋身份嘅一個識別啦。咁二嚟佢哋都已經係一個二嚟佢哋根本就係一個秘密警察秘密咁樣委派落嚟嘅警察咁樣嘅做法，其實係即係對於可以有一個透明度去追究翻佢哋嗰個行為咧係極度困難。咁但係更加重要嘅咧就係根據基本法咧，香港嗰個維持治安咧係由香港政府自己去做，中國政府係不能夠插手，中國嘅法律不能夠喺香港實施，中國嘅執法人員唔可以喺香港執行任何嘅法律。呢一個喺基本法入面係寫得好清楚，亦都係香港人非常重視嘅一個保障，亦都係點解去年會發生一個咁大嘅反修例嘅示威，就係因為香港人唔想有大陸嘅唔想會遭受到內地嘅法律制度嘅一個影響。咁所以即係如果嗰個報導嘅情況係屬實嘅話咧，呢一個係再一次係一個中國政府嚴重違反一國兩制之下佢嘅保障佢嘅承諾啦。咁亦都係對於香港嘅人權保障咧，即係如果佢能夠靜靜雞咁樣去做，而唔需要向任何人負責，唔需要向任何人去解釋佢做咗啲乜嘢嘅時候咧，呢一個係極度危險嘅。
你好啊，我係同學記者嚟嘅，我想問一問阿黃先生同埋葉小姐㗎。首先一個好簡單嘅問題先啦，究竟我哋而家香港嘅處境同80年代全球換軍事政權嘅時期有咩分別咧？而我接住呢個問題就係問，當我哋而家嘅警察係非法搜證、暴力虐打示威者，甚至係插贓嫁禍，而律政司或者律政檢控專員係默許呢啲發生，而我哋嘅下級法院同埋中級法院係完全唔理呢啲警察嘅濫權濫捕行為嘅時候，究竟我哋而家應該點樣自處咧？我哋仲諗下警察又有啲執法部門用咩條例去控告我哋嘅抗爭者或者市民嘅時候，其實我哋係咪應該擔心而家市民或者抗爭者嘅處境係非常之危險咧？因為我哋係完全得唔到應有嘅法律保障，而唔係我哋要擔心佢用乜嘢條例去控告我哋嘅市民或者抗爭者。唔該。
呢個比較係令人非常之心痛嘅一個比較。咁我哋即係都知道喺南韓發生嘅事情，我哋可能睇電影或者係即係尤其係嗰個畫面出嚟嘅時候，當我哋想像到係香港嘅抗爭者或者你身邊嘅人受到呢啲咁樣嘅對待嘅時候，咁嗰個係更加殘忍嘅。咁嗰個分別咧，我哋香港同南韓嗰陣時面對嘅打壓嘅分別咧，其實好簡單。 我哋而家對住嘅唔係香港政府，而係中國共產黨。而呢樣嘢令到我哋個抗爭係其實同佢哋相比係更加困難。如果係俾咗幾個月之前，我可能都唔敢將香港同南韓或者同西藏、新疆嗰啲去比較，因為深刻我哋都其實未真係咁危險。但係去到而家呢一步，大家都知道被自殺未有證據，咁你相唔相信？咁即係俾人打到斷骨，有啲就現場打到骨都飛埋出嚟，咁呢啲大家都知道嘅。咁但係我哋而家做緊嘅抗爭，其實最大嘅問題就係我哋唔係搞得掂香港政府就可以，其實背後仲有一個中國政府。咁中國政府喺全世界，佢個影響力係極大。咁所以呢個就係我認為我哋香港人係好值得全世界去學習嘅一個原因，就係我哋係面對住咁樣嘅國家，我哋都願意企到出嚟。呢個係個分別啦。咁我哋可以做啲咩呢？又或者我哋嘅抗爭者面對嗰個危險，其實我唔識講，我就係知道我哋做好我哋嘅每一步，每一個人喺自己嘅領域嗰邊做好，咁我哋係幫到件事嘅。咁抗爭者嗰邊，我相信有好多人都係幫緊佢哋嘅。例如黃國同律師啦。咁佢係做緊啲救援嘅工作嘅，咁仲留喺香港嘅人，其實都係好危險嘅。咁但係會唔會再出嚟抗爭？呢啲純粹係睇個人會唔會再出嚟。我諗全香港嘅市民都會好不忍再見到有人再受傷嘅。咁但係我相信香港人嘅創意，又或者我哋其實係我哋好叻嘅，香港人好聰明嘅。我相信我哋係可以堅持到落去，我哋贏嘅嗰一日。咁樣講雖然有啲虛，咁但係即係面對咁樣嘅困難嘅時候，冇得答你點樣去保護我哋嘅手足嘅安全，因為警察可以濫用佢個權力。正如雖然你話我哋唔應該講即係警察用啲咩條例去告我哋嘅人，咁但係呢個就正正係佢哋個武器，呢個就係我哋要睇到嘅嘢。我呢排睇咗套戲，南韓嘅幸存者，我見到嘅時候，我覺得最令我有感觸嘅就係嗰班17歲嘅受訓10日嘅細路要去打仗，同共產黨打仗。咁成個場面係好血腥嘅。咁你睇翻我哋香港嘅抗爭，我哋係唔可以同警察咁樣去打。我哋可以做嘅就係企喺度俾佢打。講難聽啲，我哋除咗救人之外，我哋就係企喺度俾你打。呢個係極度殘忍嘅事情，呢個都係極度殘忍嘅現實。呢個就係我哋而家面對緊嘅嘢。咁所以我哋即係大家都知道，所以我哋先去揾咁多唔同嘅方式去嘗試幫呢場運動。
唔該冇。咁當然我都冇辦法去有一啲嘅冇辦法有一啲全盤嘅計劃去行動計劃去分享俾香港人知。下一步我哋可以點樣做？點樣去面對咁樣而家咁不公平、咁不公義嘅情況？咁但係點解咁困難？因為其實我哋唔單止係面對緊一啲個別嘅事件啦，單一嘅事件其實係成個制度喺一直以嚟都係冇一啲好強嘅保障，一啲制度上嘅人權保障啦。而且咧，亦都係近年係有一個全球嘅威權主義嘅崛起。其實好多地方都面對緊一個人權自由、民主受侵害嘅情況，受侵蝕嘅情況。咁喺呢一個時候，即係香港人可以點樣自處？即係我當然不能夠講話繼續咁樣，因為呢個成本係確實係好大。對面對住一個會無所不用其極去揾法例去檢控，又或者唔用法例就咁捉咗你翻去 會施以酷刑嘅一個政府，又或者係甚至係會跨境面對緊中央，佢會跨境去將你捉翻大陸去囚禁嘅一個呢啲咁大嘅困難，我冇可能話繼續，但係除咗堅持落去，即係如果唔係用堅持落去繼續去抗爭，繼續去追求民主自由人權，我睇唔到呢一個威權政府，一個威權政權點樣會憑空消失。我諗過抗爭嘅成本係好大，去從歷史上去睇民主化又或者係爭取人權，都係要付出好多。咁可幸嘅係香港得到好大嘅國際關注啦。咁阿毛頭先都講咗好多，去國際會議上嘅或者國際媒體上，或者其他國家嘅議會，佢點樣關注我哋香港嘅情況。其實我自己都有去一啲國際嘅人權會議，其實佢哋都好關注香港嘅情況。香港嘅人權情況可能比起其他嘅國家唔係最差，我哋面對緊嘅可能佢哋好多年嚟都面對緊。但係佢哋好關注香港，因為香港人好叻、好堅定去爭取我哋想要嘅嘢。佢哋亦都即係覺得我哋好勇敢啦，因為我哋面對嘅係一個咁大嘅中國政府。咁咁可能喺譬如國際上，我哋可以繼續做一啲嘅游說啦。咁見到譬如點解警隊要派人去聯合國，其實佢都關注佢喺國際上嘅面子嘅問題。咁所以即係喺呢一方面都係佢一個弱點。咁當然我哋去做國際游說唔會有立竿見影嘅效果，冇一樣嘢有立竿見影嘅效果。咁但係我諗就係都要靠大家嘅創意啦，去繼續去堅持。
唔好意思，或者我再補充多少少。其實國際戰線之所以咁重要咧，其實我哋睇翻南韓當年點解會抗爭成功，如果我冇記錯嘅話，應該都係為咗做奧運啦、國際壓力啦咁樣。咁當然我哋短期就見到中國有類似嘅嘢，而且中國咁強大，就未必會因為一個奧運咁樣就去屈服。咁畢竟佢除咗香港，仲有好多地方做一啲好殘忍嘅打壓、鎮壓咁樣嘅。咁但係我哋都唔好忘記，其實國際係真係我哋可能係一個最後嘅手段。我哋除咗美國、歐洲唔同嘅國家，你甚至唔係話已發展國家，其實好多地方都可以，佢哋都係中國威權之下嘅受害者。咁當有一日大家係一齊對中國施壓嘅時候，其實中國佢冇可能係1000年、10000年都係一個全世界嘅一個霸權。咁佢終有一日會有佢變弱嘅時候，咁可能嗰啲時候就係我哋點樣去改變呢個現狀嘅時候。分享一個經驗啦。北歐嘅3個國家之中啦，其實瑞典咧係受到中國嘅壓力咧係最直接嘅。咁佢哋國家咧就即係桂民海，大家都知道桂民海事件。咁瑞典係受到好大嘅壓力。咁係中國嘅駐瑞典嘅大使咧，即係中國嘅外交官啦，係瑞典咯。佢係即係2年以嚟咧係非常之囂張啦。佢會直接對住瑞典嘅政府，即係佢國家境內啦，佢話：你哋一個咁細嘅國家，竟然妄想去對抗我哋中國咁大嘅國家，即係簡直就係一個輕量級嘅選手妄想對抗一個重量級嘅選手。佢會係公開咁樣俾人照肺咗40次，佢係繼續係咁樣做嘅。咁除此之外，其實瑞典政府即係我之前可能都講過啦，喺11月嘅時候，瑞典11月咧就做一份報告，就係調查翻瑞典嘅一啲企業咧係被中國去收購嘅情況咯。咁所以其實瑞典咧政府咧係有啲動作嘅，佢係知道咧，我哋有時就話今日香港，明日台灣，或者係明日歐洲咁樣。但其實瑞典政府自己知道好快㗎啦，係嚟緊嘅。咁所以咧 我哋只可以寄望我哋繼續我哋嘅工作，嚟令到出邊有一日會感受到佢哋受到中國嘅嗰種威脅嘅時候，佢哋幾時要開始採取行動。其實呢排大家都見到肺炎嘅情況，相信歐洲嗰邊係好明白同中國嘅一個無論經濟上又好嘅一啲關係啦，咁係好影響佢哋國家嘅一個國家嘅經濟又好，甚至乎而家嘅即係市民嘅安全。咁我哋就唯有係藉住呢啲機會去，正如我頭先話去講真相，我哋甚至乎係要俾出邊啲人知道個真相，唔止係香港發生嘅警暴，而係全世界而家係中國霸權嘅一個受害者。咁只有令到佢哋明白，我哋先會有更加多人係同我哋企埋同一陣線。正如我哋雨傘運動嘅時候，我哋唔會估到有200幾萬人上街。咁我哋就係用我哋嘅方式去令到更加多人明白，去加入我哋嚟做呢個抗爭。咁我哋而家咧就係要將呢個抗爭咧係發帶到全世界。咁呢個係我哋嘅歷史責任，香港人嘅歷史責任。我哋唔係淨係救自己，我哋仲要係去救其他嘅地方嘅人。
呢個問題咧，我都問過黃之鋒先生嘅，咁我又想問翻眾志國際組成員黃翼寶先生咯，我都係代表廣大市民問嘅，究竟呢份傳説中嘅美國制裁名單究竟幾時出爐咧？因為其實好多市民都希望呢份制裁名單可以對我哋香港嘅警察執法部門施以一大嘅壓力。究竟呢份名單幾時出爐咧？
好老實咁講，美國線嘅嘢咧，我就唔係咁多參與嘅。咁但係其實即係去到最後，美國幾時出爐呢啲嘢咧，都係要睇翻美方佢哋個情況啦。咁我只可以話我哋都好希望呢樣嘢可以及早去發生嘅。咁但係呢樣嘢我而家真係冇辦法答到你。但係我哋見到美方同中方嘅一個關係係越嚟越差嘅時候，咁我哋都知道即係唔同國家佢哋做嘅嘢都會同佢哋國家自己嗰個對華政策係有關。咁如果中國而家咁樣去將武漢肺炎推俾美國嘅話，咁我只可以話，咁呢個就係睇下佢哋兩個國家之間嘅角力。咁呢啲冇辦法呢個地方答到你嘅。
係因為由於時間所限，可能我哋只能夠俾多一間媒體去問問題。
我係香城公民媒體嘅，咁我又想問翻，如果政府強行推行23條條例啦，香港人會唔會有進一步嘅行動，同埋應該去點樣去應對？
係回應翻你問題啦，咁就你講到就係當政府真係推行23條嘅時候，究竟我哋香港人咁點樣去面對咧？其實先講翻個情況啦，就好似頭先我發言都提到啦，袁國勇教授咧喺即係袁國勇教授嗰個言論啦，咁佢就喺朝頭早講一樣，另喺同一日嘅夜晚就即刻收翻。其實我哋會見到，首先佢作為一個公眾人物，已經係受到打壓，但係呢一刻23條係都未成立嘅，未立到法嘅。咁我哋首先第一個方向就係我哋好擔心嘅影響係咩啦？同我第二個方向我會講下點樣做。咁第一個方向個影響就係話，連公眾人物都受到一個打壓嘅時候咧，我哋都其實好害怕呢一種嘅打壓延伸到去我哋嘅日常生活，例如我哋嘅社交媒體啦，又或者其實我哋平日講嘢或者互相交談之間，究竟會唔會影響到我哋人與人之間嗰個信任嘅問題？至於我哋會點樣去做呢？其實政府已經 喺現階段做咗好多令大家失望嘅事情㗎啦，係啦，我哋難聽啲講，即係多一條唔多啦。我哋就會繼續去，當然係希望呼籲大家抗爭嘅就可以抗爭啦。咁亦都希望就算出唔到嚟抗爭嘅人，係繼續去關注呢件事，俾佢哋了解到政府去強行推呢條法例只會令到人民反抗，佢哋係做錯。所以我哋都係呼籲香港人啦，抗爭者又好，你唔係出嚟抗爭嘅都好，我哋會不惜一切咁去推倒呢個惡法咯。抗爭我哋係仍然會係繼續嘅。
因為時間所限，所以今日嘅記者會到此為止。再一次多謝各位記者朋友到場啦，咁亦都多謝今日隨提供立俾 HK。如果大家仲有疑問，可以留喺問題同聯絡資料，我哋會書面回應嘅。Unfortunately, we will need to announce the end of the press conference now. We would like to thank everyone for coming in today and also thank you, Librarian HK Provider. And we hope you will have all taken something away. If you still have any outstanding questions that you didn't manage to get in, we do apologize for that. But you are more than welcome to leave behind your contact, and we will get back to you with a written response in due course. Many thanks indeed again for coming today. Thank you.
收埋你杯酒杯水。